Hi, Tannah. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Oh,
Here we are on another weeknight, but we're not together.
bummer.
Yeah, that's all right. So, yeah, getting in these evening ones because I'm going to be out of town. So, we got to do it on a weeknight.
It's kids.
And because kids.
And because
Yes. I don't know how many people listen to this will immediately turn this podcast off when I say this thing I'm about to say, but we also have a big full moon happening. When this comes out, it will not be a full moon, but on the day we're recording, it's a full moon.
listen, love that precursor for tonight because I feel a little curse wordish today.
This one might be
This was
explicit.
explicit.
This,
If there's
yeah.
kids in the room, Irma.
We were feeling a little of that full moon energy today. I was talking with someone earlier and I could not stop myself. And I was like, God, I am so sorry. I am just a little spicy today. Can't help
Listen,
it.
the hair is giving full moon for me.
Ugh.
The hair is giving wild, angry beast. For those of you watching on YouTube, it's the
Yeah.
full moon.
Yeah. We're just going with that. All of it. All of it.
This is water, not explicit.
Yes. Not, it's not,
Not explicit. This is not
not,
moonshine.
not, I was going to say, it's not a jar of vodka. It is water.
It is water.
At least as far as we can tell.
Stay
Yeah.
linked in here to the episode and you might determine
All right.
hydration is key. Hydration is key, especially in a full moon
Yes.
when you're feeling angry. Should I leave it out in the moonlight?
Oh, maybe.
Moon water,
Yeah. Moon water.
if you've never heard of it.
Okay. Yes, that is a thing. I have heard of people doing that. So now, if you've stuck with us for that initial intro about the full moon, just a quick reminder if you're new here, Tannah and I are both IEQ9 certified coaches with that tool for the Enneagram. And this is our podcast called the Enneagram Adventure. And we use the tool both for our own personal development to better understand the people around us, professional development. We used it to help develop teams, professionals, all that sort of stuff. So tonight we are going to
Technique
talk about
13.
centers. Oh, yeah, that's right. Is it? It is, isn't it?
13 on, listen, there's a lot of star things and number things going on.
So we're going to talk about centers of expression, which is a structure we haven't talked about within the Enneagram yet. And then depending on how that goes, we might dive into some other stuff also. So we've talked about the centers in the Enneagram, right? So the head or the thinking center, the heart or the feeling center, and then the action or the gut center. We talked about that in previous episodes. And just a reminder for those, 8, 9, and 1 sit in the action or gut center. 2, 3, 4 sit in the feeling or heart center. 5, 6, 7 sit in the head or thinking center. And the centers of expression correlate to those centers in a couple of ways. Center of expression can also be called center of intelligence, and we can talk about how that's different. But the centers of expression are feeling, thinking, and action. And so they do correlate to those centers. But the idea behind it is that if you are high in thinking in your center of expression, it's about how you express yourself. So you'll use cognitive language. I am high in thinking, for example. So I say things like, I think, I'm curious about
I was just going to say, I'm
thing.
curious about
Yes.
that's the whole
Yes.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it correlates to that expression, right? So I express myself through thinking language. Do you want to do the feeling
Yeah. Therefore,
center?
you will hear me say, I feel like, or that feels like, even when I'm like playing it back to someone who's like, if I'm providing coaching or advice to somebody, I'll say, okay, let me try to understand the feeling
Yep.
because
Yes.
I'm high empathy, but it's really hard for me to articulate. It's almost like if somebody's telling me like a data point, I need to figure out what feeling is tied to that. for a person or the room or whatever.
So that feeling center of expression, yeah, definitely expresses itself through feeling language. So just like Tana said, it could be using literally the word feel, but it also could be, I've heard people talk about like, ooh, did you notice the vibe in the room? Or things like that that describe
Mm-hmm.
feeling. That's the basics of the thinking center of expression, feeling center of expression. So the last one is the action center, which maybe feels less intuitive to people because it's not as obvious as, oh, I think this or I feel that. But it is action focused language. So it's like, when are we going to move on that?
Or you need
Or,
to, or
yes, you need to move on that. When are we going to go? It's language that describes taking action or moving.
verbs. Lots of verbs.
Verbs. So that was like a very high level overview of center of expression for those three areas. Tana, what would you add for how someone could utilize this kind of knowledge about either their center of expression or noticing in other people?
Great question. It is helpful to understand in yourself kind of the process of how something happens in your brain. So for me, because I'm feeling centered, I first feel something. My second highest, so if you do the IEQ 9 specific, it will tell you your first, second, and third as an example, or how aligned you are amongst the three. But for me, how it happens first is I feel it, and then I think about it, and then I action it.
Yeah.
So that tool in particular is helpful for me when I am speaking with the people that I know in my life that are closest to me who have done the IEQ 9 assessment. Because, for example, my husband, who you've all heard of many times, is an 8. So he is very action oriented. So he first wants to do something about whatever it is. Then he wants to think about it. And he kind of like barely wants to feel about it. His feeling is like, boop. But it's helpful for me to know because that's how he's triaging things in his head that happen. Triaging an event, triaging an argument, triaging a emotion, any of those things are kind of how that processes. So I would say that understanding how people might process something, it might also mean that someone takes longer in some instances to process in a way that's different than your own processing. It might mean the time that it takes to move through something with another person, or it might even be like how you're working together with someone for a common goal, right? I know that it helped me to learn my husband's for parenting styles because my feel is so high and his is like, we're going to correct or we're going to do X, Y, or Z. When my instinct is I have to move through the feeling that I have about it first. So there's a lot of ways that you can use the centers, but that's just a few. I don't know if you'd add any.
Yeah, I could use myself as an example. So being high in thinking, and I actually have a tie in action and
Oh,
feeling in my
interesting.
tri type. Now, I think that's partially because I recognized I don't think it's always been that way. Center of expression, I will tell you, is something that you can work on. And just like everything in the Enneagram, you want to work on having like balance in all of these different things that we're talking about. The goal is to not be overly reliant on one area. And so we've talked about this before, right? Anything in excess is a weakness.
Yep.
And so the goal is to balance. The goal is to, you know, notice the things you need to work on. So years ago when I first learned the Enneagram, one of the things that I noticed was my like needing to think things through so much that I could convince myself I had done something I had not actually done just because I thought about it so much. And so I recognized that pattern. And so I've worked on backing things up with action. Now I would tell you sometimes the taking action gets maybe into that like unhealthy, impulsive thing sometimes. But yeah, so I think that's why I have a tie there. I can get caught in the think about it, feel about it, think about it, feel about it, think about it, feel about it loop and like never get out of it and never move something into an action phase. This podcast is slightly an example of that. Obviously, it exists in the world now, so it's not just a thought, but I thought about an Enneagram podcast for years before actually bringing it to reality. And even Tannah and I talked about it
Me
for
too.
what? I
More.
don't know,
A year?
probably at least a year before we actually like, we're like, yes, let's do it. So that's just an example of like how the thinking feeling loop can slow action. So that could be the downfall of getting into that pattern.
Right.
Now there's the downfalls to the people who are high in action and who move to action first. Just like everyone, there's upside and downsides to this. People who tend to be action oriented first will move first. They will take action on things first without thinking or feeling about it. And then they might realize, oh shit, I took wrong action. That was not actually the right thing to do, but I was moving so quickly that I didn't even realize that I was I was doing the wrong thing, making the wrong choice.
Yeah, that resonates for sure. I think for me, the trick in or the interesting and sometimes internally polarizing thing about my number is that as a 2, I am naturally high in feeling, but the instinct for my 2-ness is to put my own needs aside. And sometimes that translates into the feeling that I'm having about the thing, but channels more like disassociate energy, where it's like, that's not, this is a burden to someone else. So I'm going to feel that feeling and I'm going to do this thing. And then I'm going to have a really big feeling about it later. Usually at a really inopportune moment where it's like I'm super annoyed because my kids won't go to bed on time and I'm frustrated and I don't know what's wrong with me because I'm so cranky. And then I go to bed and I'm like, oh my God, I'm the worst mom. Oh my God, this is because I had that feeling earlier. It's a whole thing, guys. The whole thing.
I do think it's worth pointing out in center of expression. Also, this is a place there can be nuance in the Enneagram. And while we talked about like what's typical and that it lines up with the centers of the Enneagram, not every like feeling center number, like not every person with a feeling center number will be highest in feeling in terms of their center of expression.
Right.
Some of them you will find, and it's the same with all of them. Sometimes there are twos that are high in thinking as their center of expression. Or today, Tannah, you and I talked about a 5 who's highest in feeling, which isn't super common. So there can be some nuance in the
Mm-hmm.
how the center of expression shows up. So if it doesn't resonate with you, if you're like, I make it up. If you're a 8 and you don't actually use a lot of action centered language all of the time, that's okay. It might mean that your higher center of expression is actually one of the other two.
Yep. And it's worth noting
Uh,
probably because people probably get mistyped because of that sometimes.
yeah. I think it is very possible that people get caught up again in language or the behavior associated and that could be misinterpreted. Like, oh, I must be a 5, 6, or 7 because
Yep.
I say think all the time, and that's how I express myself, or I use cognitive language. Well, sometimes some of that, the things about center of expression is that some of that's learned, right? What do you do for work? How long have you been doing it? Like that could impact how you express yourself.
Yeah, I mean, what was taught to you as a kid? Or what were the questions that
Recognized in your
people asked?
house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, what were the questions that people asked you? I was just thinking about this because I asked my kids almost every day, what was the favorite part of your day? I'm trying to make sevens, you guys. I'm trying.
There's like no good way to experiment on some of that stuff, but I am very curious. Like if you could truly influence, or how much of that is like the child's own internal, like
Yeah.
subconscious, or not even subconscious, like unconscious decisions stuff that's going on. Because, you know, when I think about the things this, well, we'll end up on a soul child train here if I go too far. So I'm gonna try not to go too far. But, I think about the things that happened, like I can point to the things that happened that drove me in the five direction. None of that was anywhere near conscious. I wasn't old enough, nor did I have the self-awareness at that time to like make a conscious choice. It was more when you think about kids and like their deep knowing of things, it was more like that intuitive thing that was like, this will keep you safe. But why
Yeah.
my unconscious chose that versus what it chose in my sister or my brother who grew up in similar chaos, right?
And it's a little bit like I guess some of it, I would venture to guess, because as much as we parents love to say that we treat our kids the same, we do not. I think that we try, but I'm also a fan of thinking of them as individuals. And sure, we're fair, right? Like fair and equitable amongst both of them. But what one needs, the other one, like, doesn't really need. Like, they're just kind of their own different little beings. So maybe there's a chance that, like, they learn those things based off of their own individual treatment. And I think about, like, how much kids are testing, right? Like, they're testing what works and they're testing what doesn't. So, but yeah, if we're not careful, we'll end up on Soul Child. But like, it's it's crazy to think about, like, how I think about even my center of expression, like my primary as feeling. The sadness that I have in it a little bit is like I did have the big feelings, but then I had to like put them elsewhere because they,
Yeah.
convenient or whatever.
I think for me, yeah, I just did it. I think for me that some of the center of expression being around thinking had to do with the way it's similar to how fiveness was reinforced in the house that I was in,
Oh, sure.
but it was around the that center of expression was around how we were rewarded and recognized for the sort of academic stuff that we were involved in. So the way we thought about something,
Sure.
or, being called smart, right? That would reinforce like cognitive language. Some of that kind of stuff, I think, drove a little bit, where
Mhm.
that was a way to, and that was also a way to talk about things that weren't feelings, right? Where it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, that tracks because I never felt like the smart kid.
I don't
Right.
know that I ever felt like the smart kid. I was homeschooled though, so you have to remember, like I was homeschooled for most of,
Right.
not
Well,
all of, but most of.
I just
So
never felt like was like, well, from a from an IQ perspective, I will not get love and attention that way because I don't have X, Y, or Z ability, right? Like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not intelligent enough, or whatever, but I could do other things. I was super social. Who's surprised by that? So I always had a lot of friends. I like excelled in other areas and kind of found like that, like feedback from other people. But I think about too, where I don't remember how high my thinking center is in relation to my feeling center. My feeling center, like far away, like off the charts. But I can remember that the person who reinforced something different in me was actually my grandma. And it wasn't until college that I really thought, like, oh, I'm actually do this. Like, I'm going to graduate from college. And to this day, the recurring nightmare that I have is that I didn't actually get a degree. Tell me you have
It's not
imposter
real.
syndrome without telling me you have imposter syndrome. It's
It's
not real.
funny. It's not real.
It's not real. I actually missed 4 classes that I didn't even know I signed up for. And I don't have a bachelor's degree.
Our brains are like tricky that way too, right?
Yeah.
So
I
maybe
don't
this is
have like the teeth falling out dream. I don't have the I'm standing in front of everybody naked dream.
you dream that you didn't actually finish school.
Didn't actually finish school. To the point where like the
Um,
next day it will hit me like, God, why am I so anxious? And I'll be like, oh my God,
so
that's right. No, that's not true. I did.
if
One
nothing
Wednesday.
else, when people listen to this podcast, it should be relatable in so many ways. Like, you should leave listening to this podcast and be like, oh, like maybe I'm not such a hot mess after all,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Anna and I are every bit of a hot mess.
The hottest mess, you know?
Yes.
So
Okay.
anywho, Hot Mess Express. Toot toot.
All right. So, do we want to keep going on center of expression or?
I think we should go into conflict style.
Oh, sure. That's a good idea. So, conflict styles. So, I think we've referenced conflict styles a couple of times,
Yep.
but haven't done a deep dive. And so, the conflict styles don't correlate to a center in the same way as some of the other structures correlate. They sort of bop around the circle. So, one number in each of the 3 centers is one of 3 conflict styles, typically. This is another thing similar to center of expression that can be a little more nuanced. And so what we're going to say is not necessarily true for everyone, but this is what's most typical in the Enneagram.
Yep.
The 3 conflict styles are competency, positive outlook, and reactive. And you can probably guess by just intuitively hearing those words as to what they mean, but we'll give a little description before we tell you the numbers, and you can think about how this shows up for you. And so, competency conflict style is logical, methodical. It typically shows up like, because the other thing I will say about conflict style is when we think about conflict, it's not necessarily always like an argument with another person. It can be, but you could think of something that causes you to feel conflict in your life or disappointment. Sometimes it shows up
Yeah.
for me personally. Like if I'm really disappointed, I'll have the same or similar reaction as I would in an argument in some ways. So anyway, so for competency, like it can be really logical. It can be like, well, here's all the reasons this thing happened and it didn't work out. Right. So here's a list logically, right? Like, oh, well, we weren't ready for this, or oh, well, we didn't have the money, or we hadn't read the book, we didn't do the research, we didn't know the things, right? And it becomes like this logically, this is why this didn't work out, or this is why the argument happened. The downside of the competency, because you can listen to that and be like, oh, well, that sounds like super great. The downside of the competency conflict style is that it can also look like a logic bully. We'll talk about this in more detail, but it's the in an argument, blowing holes in the person that you're having the argument with in their in the point they're trying to make because they don't have the facts to back it up. We'll give more examples. Okay, so positive outlook. Do you want to talk about what positive outlook looks like?
Yeah. So, positive outlook, can you think of something that I say consistently that would be a good? I was trying to think of like a thing because sometimes one thing that I say is like, but did you die? It's fine. We're gonna
Fine.
so
Yeah.
it's it's fine. And here's the reasons
Yeah,
why. In my head, I've rationalized that this is fine. You know what I mean? Like
this is fine. Yes.
I'll do it where like this is I am like such a classic my number, but like if I'm in a conflict with my husband over like actually something that I could legitimately be mad about, like if there was an imbalance in some duty or whatever, I'll rationalize it in my head to be like, well, I know he's been super stressed out at work, so it's fine.
Yes. You do
Fine.
say it's fine a lot. You do say it's fine a lot. It is, yeah, the positive outlook is avoidant of the conflict itself. So it's
Yeah.
a little like, how do I just
How do I not?
we're good.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. We're good. We don't need to actually have a discussion about this because
Okay.
I'm not interested in the conflict.
Hmm.
That's pretty much how positive outlook. It's reframing everything to
Oh,
the
yeah.
positive. So you could be in an argument with someone and then be like, yeah, but we're gonna come out better on the other side. Might be true, but we need to like stay in the present moment for a minute and get through this.
Yeah, so that's how I would explain it is like,
Yeah.
it's gonna be fine. We're fine.
That leaves us with reactive. And I don't know if you find this to be true, but I find when I teach the Enneagram and we talk conflict styles, reactive is one of those ones that people have a reaction to. Haha. But like, because maybe they imagine it as like big and loud and outward, like a
Mhm,
reaction that impacts other people. That's what people
mhm,
picture when you
mhm.
talk about it. What it really means for reactive numbers is that when they are in a conflict, the first thing that happens to them is that they get a physical feeling somewhere in their body. They get hot, or their heart races, or they get sweaty palms, or their face gets like red, right? That the first, in a conflict situation, first thing that happens is the physical
Yeah.
reaction. And so that can be followed with a big outward expression of anger in the
Mhm.
case of some people, but that not always, doesn't always have to be that.
Yeah, I think an 8 that I know with a reactive conflict style quickly ladders to competency. It's like boom, boom.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, ugh, I have a feeling about that. Therefore, and
Yes.
that's kind of how they move through it.
Right. So, just to give you the full picture of the numbers, you could probably tell by this conversation that I am a competency and Tana is a positive outlook in terms of conflict style. But so the way that it works is fives, ones, and three. Yes, five, ones, and threes
Yep.
are competency typically. Typically, those numbers will show up first as a competency conflict style.
Yeah.
And then the positive outlook are 9, 2, and 7. If it helps to think of it as avoidant, to paint the better picture as opposed to just positive outlook, nines, definitely, definitely. There's some avoiding there. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
They'll just remove it. So in some cases, they'll just remove themselves to avoid the
Right.
conflict. Yeah.
Right. Just real quick before we move on, one interesting thing about my 2 vibe is that positive outlook for me comes from trying to limit conflict as much as possible, is where it came from. But not only that, that there was never resolution to conflict. It was always like, okay, that happened. And now what? So, like, positive outlook is like, okay, and we're moving on. Didn't that happen?
That's a good way to put it.
Ugh. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna
No,
talk about that. We'll just let that simmer until the next time.
I do. There are some positive outlook people. I know that I do. I also feel like they keep a little score, even though they're positive outlook.
Oh, listen. I have this thing that I've done before. It is very unhealthy that I don't do anymore. Used to. But when I would like have something show up with my husband where I'd be like, see, that's that fucking thing. That's that thing. I'd like make a note of it just to
No.
bring up later. Like
Oh.
just to use like hi, I'm toxic, but I would just like note it because it was always one of those things where like he is also an 8 that is reactive, but then closely followed with competency. So then he will throw like 5 facts in my face. And I'm like, I know that you did that. I know you did that one time, but I don't remember the specifics. So there for a while, when I was in a very unhealthy space, I was like, yeah, but on this day,
Oh man. Okay. All right. I have kept score on some unhealthy things, but usually it's more like the big thing that I wouldn't let go. Right? You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that one big thing that happened 3 years ago. I don't hold on to those things anymore, but there was a time in my
well,
life where I
listen,
definitely like held on to like that one time.
listen, literal score over here.
Yeah.
I say it was that long ago. We're talking like, how long have I been working with Brandon?
I don't know, a year now? Has
Yeah,
it been a
it's been
year?
about 9 months since I done that.
Progress. It's progress.
We're evolving,
Okay.
Brandon.
So
We're out here
we're
evolving.
about, yeah, we're working on it. So reactive numbers,
Yep.
8, obviously. We've talked about eights as a reference a couple of times, but it's eights, fours, and sixes.
Yep.
And that's one of the reason it's the fours and the sixes that make me point out the that doesn't always have an outward expression.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon for eights to outwardly express their anger in a way that could feel reactive to the people around them,
Here.
where they yell or
Yeah.
bang on something or
Sorry, AIDS, you're kind of the easy example for that.
yes, because you're comfortable in your anger, which is it's good
Mhm.
for you to be comfortable in that. Again, anything in excess becomes a weakness. So that's like the caveat to all of this. But fours in the reaction, right? That's that it's so internal that then they're like burying, they don't really know what to do with it. But I do think it's common to your point, the eight follow um their physical reaction with competency. As I'm thinking through the different numbers and things I've experienced, I think that's probably true. I would guess that's very true for sixes, being in the thinking triad or the head triad, that they follow then with their list
Yeah.
of scenarios or whatever right?
Yeah.
Preparedness or all of that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And I have witnessed it happen. Now, I'm not saying all fours, I'm not saying all sixes, certainly, but I've seen it, I've witnessed it happen with fours also, where it's sort of like they come out of their fourness and like tick over right into that five wing,
Right.
or that stretch for them to one.
I have seen that. I think I've also seen even some thinks like sixes or acts like sixes before do that.
Yeah.
So, to the earlier point about nuance, this is part of it, right? But the work is looking at specifically what those things are for you and what your tendencies are and being aware of them to try to exercise something different.
Yeah, that's the whole goal of all of this. And I will tell you what's helpful. We've talked about it in center of expression, we've talked about it in other places. What's helpful to me in understanding conflict style is noticing in heated spaces right? One, there's like an awareness I have to like develop in myself through this. And
Yeah.
so it's helpful in that to be like, oh, don't be the logic bully. Like, don't. Because that part of me that comes out in conflict, and I talked to Brandon about this, we've talked about it before. That energy when a competency number goes to the logic bully space, that's just, let's be real, that's just your ego. In the cases of all of these things, like this is just your ego showing up. And like my ego goes like, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, and you need to prove it to them. Here's all the things. Like, no, like that is not healthy. Nobody wants to build a relationship with that person, right? Like, no one does. So that's where like I have to remember to like get that in check and be like, how can you come at this differently?
Yeah.
Because that like trying to prove to them that they are wrong, even if I fucking know they're wrong, trying to prove it won't actually let me win the argument. It will just make them not like me.
Holly wants
Like,
to receive.
people, yeah. Well, it's like, think about when you try to argue with someone about something like politics, right?
Yeah, there's like a no
And you
win.
could like,
Like,
and there's like a no win because, and so even if I'm like, fact, like, there's no disputing that all of these things like actually happened. They're facts. It doesn't make the person on the other side like come over to my side. So it doesn't matter if I like know the historical data
yeah.
about all of these situations. Like, it's
Yeah.
not going to change their mind. So that's like the right. So that's part of it, right? So like knowing that about yourself is important. Like, if your positive outlook, right? How do you not be avoidant? How do you ask for what you need in the situations instead of pretending it's fine when it's not fine?
Yeah.
Or if you're reactive, how do you take a moment to honor the feeling that you're having and just let
Yeah.
it move through you? Yes. So all of that stuff. But the other thing I would say is like when I know I'm going into a situation with someone where most likely there's, let's say it is someone who's going to be reactive, I will try to be more compassionate. I will talk about how I know that this conversation we're having is uncomfortable.
Right.
I understand this feels bad.
Yeah.
And so I'll try to acknowledge that for them,
Yeah.
so that we can hopefully have a more productive conversation.
I think if there's a story about conflict style that I have, I love my in-laws. They're like a second, third, for me in my case, third set of parents for me. But it was a learning curve, like coming into an environment that was like, we are very comfortable with conflict around every corner. So we would like, to this day, my husband will like call his dad and his dad will be like, hey, I need your help with XYZ. He's like, yeah, I'm not fucking doing that. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. And then his dad will say something like totally out of left field, like, yeah, well, fucking this, that, and the other thing. And he's like, that's fine, buddy. And then they like hang up. I'm like, this is awful. Are you guys fighting? Are you ever going to forgive each other? What's going on? And he's like, it's fine.
Yeah. We're just talking.
And I'm like, oh my God, I want to die. I want to crawl out of my skin. It's awful. But like, I think that's why though, and whoever's listening that also has a positive outlook and is trying to work on that and grasping reality, I would say something that is really helpful for me is to channel into that thinking center and get like really emotionally detached from the thing I'm trying to solve and be like, let's see this for what it is and how are we going to get back. What I'm working on is the time it takes to get through that. A little too long.
Well, yeah.
A little too long. But yeah, man, there are many times where I have sat in a room with my lovely in-law family that I love dearly, and I've been like, wow, who's uncomfy? Me.
And they're all fine, right?
And they're all fine. They're all fine. They're like, like I was saying earlier, I didn't grow up in a household where like conflict was ever resolved. And then they're like, yeah, well, fuck you. Yeah, well, fuck you too. And then it's fine.
You want to go get a yes, like you
Yeah.
want to go get a drink?
You need something out of the kitchen? What is happening?
That is interesting too because I grew up in a house where conflict was not hidden. It wasn't hidden at
Yeah.
all. But I don't know that it was ever that. It was never that kind of like
Like direct, like reactive.
just direct
Yeah.
and just like move on that quickly. There was definitely scorekeeping. There was definitely like in the arguments that were happening in real life, the like, well, yeah, last time, right? So again,
Yeah.
probably like logic bully was like a learned thing
Yeah.
for me.
I'm like, let me
Interesting.
dig that hole that I can stick my head in that sand, and you let me know when it's safe to come out.
Well, I mean, we talked about that a little in the Nine podcast too, right? Like in Aaron's house, so you like your husband was in a house where like everybody just fought out in the open, but they resolved things and everybody's fine. Like
Yeah.
you could have an argument and still be friends.
Yeah.
And then you were in a house where like nothing was ever resolved and avoided.
Yeah.
I was in one where it was like people fought in the open, but there was still like this kind of like unhealthy
Scorekeeping. Yeah.
scorekeeping, like whatever deal that was happening.
Yeah.
Well, in his house, like his parents literally never fought in front of him. They never fought in front of their children. So he never witnessed two adults have an argument. You think about like how somewhat like a one way that somebody becomes a nine, right? Is like
Yeah.
you literally never witness a conflict.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's
And
so true.
so it was like,
That's so true.
yeah, I'm like to the point that, I know I mentioned this on the Night podcast, so I'll just share it again because it's such a good example that the first time we were dating and had a real argument, he was like, it's over. We're breaking up because happy married couples don't fight.
Nobody fight.
Nobody fights. If you're happy and you love each other, there's no fighting. Right. So it's just like there's such a range in how like
Yeah.
this stuff can show up. And like when you think about how you learned it,
Totally. I just had this. I am getting better. I will share a quick girl story. You're aware of this, what happened. I had this interaction with someone recently that I was very surprised at. It pissed me off. It pissed me right the fuck off. I was angry. I was like, how dare they? How dare they? And I think I told you about it. And I was like verbally processing through this. I'm like, what the actual fuck? And then I get to this point where I'm gonna be like, no, I'm gonna hash this through. And I was using it recently as like a development like I was explaining it to someone. And they're like, oh, so you like didn't go to bed mad. And I'm like, that
didn't go to bed mad.
I didn't. But I told that person how I felt. You were
And that's what it
condescending.
takes.
Rude. You get what I'm saying? You get it? You get it? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Do you see it now? It was
Were
healthy.
they
I'm
were they
I'm Gucci.
accepting of your feelings?
Yeah. Like, no,
Yeah.
I can totally see that. I'm sorry. And I'm like,
Resolved.
this is great. I'm
Yes.
basically a pro.
Look at you. Growth. So much
Look
growth.
at me. Look at me that one time.
Yeah.
Look at me hanging my head on that one time.
I would say though, like that's the goal, right? Is like how can you get to like these moments where you break your pattern? Because obviously if this was something that you learned, you can unlearn it. Like you can be better.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose a different way. Like this stuff doesn't have to be here forever and ever because I grew up in a house where this is how arguments happened,
Mm-hmm.
or in the case of Aaron, right, grew up in a house where arguments didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, there's growth there and the acceptance of like, yep, it's uncomfortable, but we're still going to be fine. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all of that stuff.
I will also share like one of the more sad versions that I've seen of someone who really isn't willing to look at their own conflict style or like their fear of conflict with people who are closest to them is that it translates to a lot of shame for this person that I know. Like they'll make a decision and they'll have to answer for that with the people that they're closest to. And then they'll just like stop showing up places, like just off the face of the earth. And many times I've had this conversation with a friend of mine where it was like, why do they like not come around? Do they really think we're going to judge them for it? And it's like they don't want to have to explain it because it's shameful. And they're like, well, it can feel so isolating. So it's like just this person that refuses to work on it because it's so uncomfortable for them. So to your point about the work, like where can you find the smaller spaces where you can dip a toe in? Or honestly, maybe for some people, it's at work where there's ground rules of like policies and how
Right.
people can behave, where someone can't retaliate against you. Somebody can't like get on the wrong side of it because there's ground rules. Whereas in the wild with your
And
family or with your friends, it's like
well, and I would argue
no
like it
policy
feels a
for
certain
being a
way.
jackass in that environment, you know? Like,
Right. Yeah, you're just yeah. I think there's so much to this that bleeds over into other things. And if you just take one little piece of developing your own self-awareness and like remember that all of the work is an inside job. No one can do it for you. You have to choose to do it for yourself. And then think like in the story that you share, right, where something happens and then somebody feels so ashamed about whatever it is that happened that they just disappear. They'd rather fall out of the group of friends or whatever than show up.
mhm,
And I will tell you, like 90% of the time, probably, nobody gives a shit. Whatever the thing was that happened, a few days later, whatever, nobody else is thinking about it but you.
right.
Nobody else is thinking about it. They've all moved on because everybody is the main character of their own life. And we spend far too much time thinking that other people care about us as much as we care about us. And that's just not, that's never going to be like,
Yeah.
it's never going to be. So I just, but what I think about is that I have like a little bit of compassion for that. Cause man, there's so much opportunity to live like a better
Yeah.
life, like free of all of that,
It's devastating to
and just keep,
watch.
yeah, just, and the thing is, like, just keep showing up. Show up anyway. Like, you're worried about it, show up anyway. And if you like test the water and somebody calls you out, like, okay. But what are the chances that's actually going to happen? Probably not a lot of chances that's actually going to happen. So I don't know. That's maybe like a slightly soapboxy thing, not related to the Enneagram. But the Enneagram can help you with that. If you want to use it as a tool to be better, to understand other people around you better, you
Yeah.
can do that.
Awesome.
We should wrap on that
We should
before one of
well,
us like jumps back on it. On the
yeah, listen, it
soapbox.
won't take much for me right now.
Stupid full moon.
And my big hair is full of opinions
Yeah.
instead of full of
Yeah, I did.
statements like Gretchen Wieners. It's full of opinions.
It's full of opinions. All right. Well, make sure I there was something about this full moon and like writing down things that you are afraid to look at, like burning stuff. This one's supposed to be a big deal. So
Yeah.
we'll let you know on the next one how we've recovered from it, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Maybe we'll be maybe we'll be less spicy. Just depends.
Maybe. Maybe less spicy.
Maybe.
Maybe less curse wordy, but
Well, I mean we did swear at, but I think we've had worse.
yeah, I think we're fine.
Yeah.
I think we're fine.
All right. All right, cool.
Find us on all the
So yeah.
platforms, on all the socials. So where you find your podcast, Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Holly added us to
Yeah,
iHeart,
I heard
and like our Instagram, comment, DM, chat, text, all of your thoughts, feelings, opinions, and we can't wait to hear from you. We're on
we're
episode
still looking
13, which means if you're still listening or if you're now listening, you like something. Yell at
yeah.
me.
Thanks for showing up for us. Thanks for listening. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hit us up if you think you'd like to be on here with us. I have a couple volunteers. We can talk about that. We'll have to get you guys scheduled.
Awesome. Thanks, Holly.
All right. Cool. Talk to you later, Tana.
Bye.
Bye.